Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Madar Gavelazi, and coming up in today's newscast. In a rare regional summit, Israeli and Palestinian delegations meet in Jordan in an attempt to restore calm ahead of the month of Ramadan. As some 100,000 protest for the 8th consecutive week, the coalition is forging ahead with the legal reforms. What can we expect for the coming week? ILTV has all the latest. And as Ukraine marks 1 year of the Russian invasion, Ukrainian President Vlodomyr Zelensky with a message to Israel. We open with another deadly terror attack as 2 Israelis were murdered Sunday in Judea and Samaria after a Palestinian terrorist opened fire on an Israeli car at point-blank range. The incident occurred in the town of Huwara, south of Nablus. The victims were treated on the scene and transferred to the Rabin Medical Center in Petah Tikva, where they succumbed to their injuries. The 2 passengers were identified as residents of the nearby town of Har Bracha. The terrorist was able to flee the scene on foot, and Israeli security forces opened pursuit. And Palestinians were quick to praise the murderers, handing out sweets in Nablus, Jenin, and Gaza shortly after the attack. Meanwhile, the Ministerial Committee on Legislation approved a bill on Sunday that institutes a death penalty for terrorists. The law will now be brought for approval in the Knesset later this week. And Israeli and Palestinian delegations met in the wake of the terror attack in Jordan on Sunday in a rare discussion on political and security issues aimed at restoring calm ahead of the month of Ramadan. Joining us now with more on the summit in Jordan is Itamar Marcos, founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So, in the wake of the terror attack, a rare summit taking place, what does Israel hope to achieve from this meeting?
Well, the summit was initiated apparently by the United States. And the United States is concerned that during the month of Ramadan, which is coming up, the Palestinian Authority will initiate a lot of terror, as it has done in the past. We know that just a couple of years ago, we had the terrible wave of terror throughout Israeli cities in Ramadan. And there's no doubt, and we have talked about this, Palestinian Media Watch has reported on this, there's no doubt that the signal to the Palestinian population, the first signals for violence, come from the Palestinian Authority. Later on, the social media takes over, but it really is generated from the top. And I think that Israel hopes to have the United States put pressure on the Palestinian Authority that they cannot keep signaling and promoting violence and terror at the same time as they claim to be innocent victims. If you're promoting terror, then you're not an innocent victim. And hopefully this message will come through clearly from the United States to the Palestinian Authority.
And so what about the Palestinians? I mean, we do see some opposition from some Palestinian factions, such as Hamas, to this summit. The Palestinian Authority is weak, and as you mentioned, it has been inciting to violence. So what is their angle here? What are they hoping to gain from the meeting?
Palestinian Authority is very concerned that the new Israeli government now will have not just the immediate future, but will have 4 years to make substantial quality building changes in Judea and Samaria, and will stop the illegal Palestinian building all through Judea and Samaria. And this is probably their greatest concern. The Palestinian Authority's most important tactic in recent years has been illegal building all throughout Judea and Samaria. They put up a school in the middle of nowhere. They put up some kind of a farm in the middle of nowhere. They plant some olive trees in the middle of nowhere. And this way, they're hoping to claim all of this land for themselves. Israel has been very lax in defending what could be land that we need for our future. And this government has promised to destroy the illegal building by the Palestinian authorities and promote Jewish building in Judea and Samaria. This is, therefore, the greatest concern of the Palestinian Authority. They want the United States to put pressure on Israel to stop the building and to stop the destruction of the illegal building. So that's the balance here. Israel wants less terror, and the Palestinian Authority wants political concessions. And they both hope the United States will give them what they're looking for.
But, is the Palestinian Authority even able to deliver on this, to deliver on security? As you mentioned, they're weak. They have no sway, especially in the face of groups like Lion's Den and not to mention Hamas. So are they able to really calm the waters here?
At this point, they probably can't bring complete calm, but they certainly can make a difference. They can stop glorifying every terrorist. They can give messages, and they have many ways to give messages. They still have a gigantic security force. I mean, the security forces are weaker, but they have a very large security force. And the way they've worked in the past is when they know of a terrorist cell, they know of a Hamas cell here, they notify Israel. This is the security cooperation. It's actually good for Israel, and it's also good for the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority doesn't like to have strong Hamas in Judea and Samaria because this is, of course, a threat to their future. So if they just go back to notifying Israel when there are these, where these Hamas cells and these Lions Den cells are developing and growing, then Israel can take care of itself. So there is a possibility that Israel, with this information, could stop the terror before it gets started.
All right, well, let's hope that this summit bears some fruit and that we won't see any more terror attacks in the coming weeks like we saw today. Itamar Marcus, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And in other news, Papua New Guinea is joining the growing list of countries opening an embassy in Jerusalem. The Foreign Ministry announced the decision on Sunday, though Foreign Affairs Minister Eli Cohen spoke with his counterpart last Wednesday to confirm the move. In a statement released Sunday, Cohen thanked Papua New Guinea for its close relationship, the overwhelming support at international institutions, and the decision to establish an embassy in Jerusalem, and said this was further evidence of the warm and important relationship between the countries. Papua New Guinea has never opened an embassy in Israel, and this will be its first diplomatic mission to the country. And in other news, only hours before the onset of the Shabbat deadline, the government approved the state budget for the next 2 years. After marathon budget talks, the cabinet approved Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich's proposal for the state budget and economic plan for the 2023-2024 year. The budget will total 484 billion shekels, or about $132 billion. ILTV's William Sharon reporting.
The cabinet passed a 2-year budget. The cabinet set the budget for this year and next. 484 billion shekels in 2023 till 2024, and 513 billion shekels in 2024 till 2025. Prime Minister Netanyahu said the budget reflects a fiat economy with fiscal and monetary responsibility. He called it the first step in the right direction for the economy and for the good of all its citizens. Among the measures included in the budget are free education from the ages of 2-year-olds and a significant allowance to Israeli Defense Forces. But the largest rise was an extra 9 billion shekels for the Ministry of National Security, run by National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. The budget law will now head to the Knesset, where the first reading must pass by March 23 and pass into law by March 29th. The Israeli economy is currently performing well and is rated the 4th best in 2022 among the wealthiest nations in the OECD. Currently, leading economic experts in Israel and abroad are warning that the government's proposed judicial reform will do significant damage to the economy. However, the new budget, despite its shortcomings, is a positive step for the Israeli economy.
And the coalition is forging ahead with its proposed judicial reform legislation as the Knesset's Constitution, Law and Justice Committee, headed by MK Simcha Rotman, convened Sunday to discuss the so-called override bill. The move comes as some 100,000 Israelis gathered Saturday night for the 8th consecutive week in spots across the country for protests against the planned reforms. Saturday night's demonstrations took a turn for the worse in Tel Aviv as protesters blocked the Ayalon highway and lit bonfires. The Israel police arrested some 20 people as a result. And now, protesters are planning a day of struggle with expected disruptions and road blockages around the country on Wednesday. And joining us with the latest on the legal reforms and what we can expect this week is Alex Trayman, JNS Jerusalem Bureau Chief. Alex, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, let's talk about the protests last night. They're still not dying down, the 8th consecutive week. We did see a little bit more violence in the protests. And on the other hand, we are seeing some from the right-wing camp joining in the protests. And I'm curious what you make of this.
Well, violence has actually been one of the goals of the protest movement, and we've heard that over and over again from the organizers of the protests, saying that they thought that Netanyahu was actually inciting towards violence, and they thought that this protest movement could actually lead to a civil war. So I'm not surprised to see this elevating towards violence. Unfortunately, we're not hearing too many responsible comments from the leaders of the protest saying that we want it to be civil and not violent, although we did hear former Prime Minister Ehud Barak now calling for civil disobedience. But certainly the left wing is trying to bait the right wing into violence, and who knows where that can spiral if this doesn't get under control.
And, moving back to the Knesset, what can we expect this week? What bills are going to be put up for a vote?
Well, one of the more interesting bills that's been put up is a sort of notwithstanding clause that would give the Knesset the ability to state that a specific bill or piece of legislation that it passes is not applicable for any sort of judicial review. It's another way of trying to bypass the Supreme Court's ability to overturn Knesset legislation. It is pretty controversial clause, and I'm not sure that it will pass, but we're going to see the continuation of the passage of bills brought quickly, I think in due order, one after the next to the Knesset, probably separated in order that if the Supreme Court would knock down one, that it doesn't knock down the entire process. So that's why you're seeing these bills separated. But the Justice Minister, Yariv Levin, has stated that he wants to see the entire judicial reform package completed before the end of the current Knesset session, which ends around the Passover holiday.
And we did see, though, some concession from the coalition. MK Simcha Rothman announcing that he's made some amendments to the override bill, easing some of the more controversial aspects of it. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the override is the most controversial of the bills because it requires just a simple majority of 61 to overturn legislation, and this can be weaponized either by the current coalition or by any future coalition, whether it's the right or the left. You don't want to see a simple coalition be able to overturn any judgment made by the court. But I think that perhaps one of the reasons why Rothman and Levin have put these override as a major portion of its judicial reform policy is part of what we would call the shuk mentality in Israel, come with the maximalist price and then show a willingness to negotiate on the price. So I think that by putting the very harsh simple majority override clause onto the table from the very beginning, by removing some of its strictness, some of its power, I think that they're able to keep some of the other more important elements on the table and also demonstrate their ability to compromise.
All right, Alex Trayman, thank you so much for joining us today and providing us with all the latest updates.
Thank you so much.
And moving on, American Jewry was on alert this weekend after white nationalist groups called for a so-called day of hate against Jews. Across the country, Jewish congregations and organizations added extra security as law enforcement agencies indicated that the threats were serious, though luckily no major incidents were reported. ILTV Steve Leibowitz reports.
The anti-Semitic threats from white supremacist groups declared February 25th to be a day of hate against Jews. The online threats did not list targets or locations, and no specific attacks against Jewish individuals or property were reported. News of the threatened Day of Hate came following a leaked internal memo from the New York Police Department's Intelligence and Counterterrorism Bureau.
We're not aware of any direct credible threats. We've talked to every level of law enforcement we could think of. But we want to make sure we were safe, so we notified the community. The community's taking appropriate steps. But in the meantime, we hope tomorrow people are Jewish the way they want to be Jewish.
Online anti-Semitic hate groups had called for anti-Jewish action, including the placing of banners, stickers, flyers, and messaging against the Jews. Police in cities around the U.S. stepped up action, and there were dozens of local television reports about the threats. Anti-Semitic hate crimes have been rising in recent years, even in smaller states. White supremacist groups were largely pushed underground over the past decades, but they have become emboldened in recent years, staging rallies and regularly spreading anti-Semitic online hate, and by hanging banners, distributing flyers, and scrawling anti-Semitic graffiti. Hate crimes are trending higher in several major cities, with record numbers of violent incidents.
And this weekend marked 1 year since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, an invasion that was supposed to take just weeks, but instead turned into a war that now continues with no end in sight. Protests were held in many major cities around the globe, marking the first anniversary of the Russian invasion. And meanwhile, Ukrainian President Vlodomyr Zelensky pleaded with Israel to provide military assistance. The details in the following report. Tens of thousands of anti-Russian protesters marked the first anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in major cities around the globe. There were angry protests in Washington, Toronto, Paris, Brussels, and Berlin. And cities lit up their monuments with the Ukrainian flag in solidarity. In an address to the Ukrainian people marking the one-year anniversary, President Vlodomyr Zelensky said Ukraine will persevere.
Ми витримуємо всі погрози, обстріли, касетні бомби, крилаті ракети, дрони камікадзе, блекаут, холод. Ми сильніше за це. Це був рік стійкості, рік небайдужості, рік мужності, рік болю, рік надії, рік витримки, рік єдності, рік незламності, лютий рік незламності. Його головний підсумок – ми вистояли. Ми не зазнали поразки і зробимо все, аби цього року
Zelensky also had a clear message to Israel: choose a side in the war. During a press conference in Kiev marking the anniversary, Zelensky said Israel must ultimately fully ally in the Western effort to oppose the invasion, though he acknowledged that Israel has a complex relationship with Russia.
Israel has a complex situation with Russia, with Iran and Syria, etc. However, I very much would like them to be not a mediator in this war, but to choose a side.
Zelensky also noted an improvement in ties between Jerusalem and Kiev, but remained frustrated with Israel's failure to provide defensive weapons. Israel has provided Ukraine with over $22 million in humanitarian aid and set up a field hospital to treat wounded Ukrainians in the early days of the war. Last week, Israel voted, along with 140 other nations, in support of a resolution demanding that Russia withdraw its forces. Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen visited Kiev last week and met with Zelensky. Later, former Knesset Speaker Yuli Edelstein and former Minister Zev Elkin met Zelensky and said it was time for Jerusalem to stop sitting on the fence and provide meaningful help to Ukraine, including military support. And speaking of humanitarian aid, the Sheba Tel Shomer Medical Center in Israel has not only been ranked one of the top hospitals in the world, it is also a leader in international efforts for humanitarian aid to war-torn and disaster-stricken countries like Ukraine and Turkey. Joining us now with more on these efforts is Brian Abrams, CEO of the American Friends of Sheba Medical Center. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Vidar.
So, as we've just seen, we've marked 1 year since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Israel was one of the first countries to send humanitarian aid. What can you tell us about Sheba's involvement in these efforts?
Sure. Sheba, the only field hospital actually that was put on Ukrainian soil during the conflict, was an Israeli field hospital, but it was the first time in Israel's history that Israel sent a civilian field hospital into a war zone. They put Sheba in charge of it. Sheba already had a field hospital that they'd set up and practiced and drilled with, and they sent in Sheba to organize the Israeli effort on the ground. The field hospital eventually left after 6 or 7 weeks, but without much fanfare, we're still on the ground there. There's been, unfortunately, a lot of incidents of sexual assault of women and boys and girls in Ukraine, and of course, in the middle of a war, there's not a lot of facilities for treatment. So we equipped a mobile women's health clinic on wheels. It's pulled by a truck. It has 2 exam rooms, an entrance room, advanced equipment, and it drives around Ukraine. No one needs an appointment. No one needs to pay anything. They just show up. We send text messages, et cetera, to put the word out, come to a city, park for a few days or a week, and treat women and children.
Wow, that's really an incredible endeavor. what else can you tell us about Ukraine? You said, how long has this this effort been going on, this mobile clinic?
The mobile clinic we got on the ground in Ukraine about a month or 6 weeks ago, and we're just going to stay in it as long as it's needed. We partner with 2 other organizations, Kvitna and Israeli Corridor for Ukraine, and we're going to continue to treat and help. We've also had Ukrainian wounded brought to Sheba. As you may know, Sheba does 100% of the rehabilitation for injured IDF soldiers. Yeah. So we have a lot of expertise in prosthetics, physical rehab, etc. So Ukrainian wounded have been brought to Sheba for rehabilitation.
Amazing, and not just in Ukraine, but Sheba also sent a delegation to Turkey, to the earthquake, to help out with the earthquake. How did they assist there?
Correct. 6 or 7 of our staff were activated to military duty to go with the IDF field hospital. They were operating on the ground in Turkey for a while, but then the entire Israeli group pulled out. But we're sending back the Sheba staff in plain clothes, and this time not in uniform, to work in Turkish hospitals to treat victims.
To help with the victims of the earthquake?
Correct. There's a lot of, again, physical rehabilitation, a lot of crush injuries, and we're going to have Sheba staff, and we may even be bringing Turkish victims to Israel.
And initially, Sheba was there to help with the search and rescue.
Also, the IDF was doing more search and rescue. We had Sheba staff doing the medical side of it.
The medical side, absolutely. And not just to these areas, but I understand that Sheba sent delegations essentially all over the world, also in Africa. What can you tell us about some of the other places that Sheba staff have visited?
Israel's National Center for Disaster Humanitarian Medicine is housed at Sheba. And for a medical center that's 20% of the Israeli healthcare system, we're also quite an international aid organization. In the month of January alone, we had 4 missions to Africa. We sent a group of pediatricians to Nigeria. There's a kind of pediatric eye cancer that is highly treatable but fatal if untreated, and has to be treated by getting the chemotherapy through an artery directly into the eye. We sent a team to Nigeria to train the Nigerians on how to do this so they could then train other people in the country. We sent 2 missions to Ethiopia, both working on maternal health. And then the U.S. Fifth Fleet, which is based in Bahrain, decided to do a humanitarian mission to Mombasa, Kenya, to help the Kenyans with mass casualty drills, mitigating dengue fever, and also maternal health. And of the entire world, the U.S. Navy asked Sheba Medical Center to be their medical partner, not the Israeli Navy, but Sheba Medical Center. So Sheba went in with the U.S. Navy and conducted about a week of drills and training with the Kenyans.
And so, I have to ask, why do you think Sheba in particular, and in Israel in general, a small country, is such a formidable force when it comes to humanitarian aid and international aid around the world?
Israel has always kind of outpunched its weight in humanitarian assistance. I think, though, it's grown. If you look back in Israel's history, what was Israel exporting in the 50s and 60s? Agriculture and agricultural technology. And then it was weapon systems and intelligence. Now, in the era in which we live, and COVID taught us that every human being on the planet is biologically connected, the problems are global and the solutions are global, healthcare now has moved to the front. And Sheba now, because it's the largest medical center in Israel, largest in the Middle East, has become a partner with the state in reaching out to the world. So Sheba went to all the Abraham Accord countries to sign bilateral medical agreements. Sheba went to Azerbaijan, not necessarily for the Azerbaijani medical system, but to help strengthen relations with another country in the Middle East. So Sheba has become a partner with the Israeli government in reaching out to the world in the way that Israelis stretch far beyond the size of the country and their reach.
Absolutely. Incredible work that the Sheba Medical Center is doing. Brian Abrams, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And now, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Clear skies are expected around the country tonight with lows averaging around 10 degrees Celsius or 51 Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, we will get a warm, sunny day with steady top temperatures, seeing highs of about 27 degrees Celsius or 81 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channels, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and don't forget to check out our new and improved website, iltv.tv, with all the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Ladar Gavelazi. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.